Okay, Boker Tov. Welcome back, everybody. So, Masechet Beitzah, Perek Sheni. Yesterday we started the second Perek. Let's go over again. We started talking about the requirement of Eruv Tavshilin. We're going to get into more details today. Again, Eruv Tavshilin, we're dealing with a case whereby you have Yom Tov, as will be the case this year, Rosh Hashanah. You have Yom Tov, which falls out on Friday. So Yom Tov falls out on Erev Shabbat. So in order to prepare, in order to cook and perform other forms of preparation from Yom Tov to Shabbat, one would need to do an Eruv Tavshilin. Again, this would be permitted d'oraita in the first place, but Rabbanan restricted it. So again, it's always helpful to know when we know that things are midrabanan. Sometimes you hear about an Eruv or this or that, and the other loophole, so to speak. People say, oh, well, how is that possible? How can the Rabbanan allow it? The answer is, it's only forbidden in the first place because of Rabbanan, so they can put the mechanism in place, whatever they want, in order to permit it. And that is going to be the case with Eruv Tavshilin. So let's just read the Mishnah again. One daf tet vav amud bet at the top. Yom Tov shechal yot erev Shabbat. Lo yiva Shabbat chila mi Yom Tov leShabbat. We said Yom Tov falls out on erev Shabbat, what's colloquially known as Friday. So we do not cook on Yom Tov for Shabbat. Aval mevashelu Yom Tov, but you can cook for Yom Tov itself. The imotir otir leShabbat, and if you have leftover, you can eat the leftovers on Shabbat. Right. So example would be, let's say somebody's doing a barbecue on Yom Tov. Okay, it's permitted, certain permutations and things one has to be aware of. But a person's doing a barbecue, an ala ish, as they call it, and you know how much food you need. Right, so you're putting all the meat on, and then you're finished. And instead of sitting down to eat, you say, "Well, we've still got more meat. Let's cook some more meat, and then we can eat it tomorrow." That's completely forbidden. That is cooking for Shabbat. On the other hand, if you don't know how much you need and you're cooking the meat, you say, "Well, I think we need some more for today." And then it turns out, as it usually does, that you've made far too much food and you've got left over. Then you can eat that on Shabbat, no problem. Okay, of course. We're going to see that if you Shabbat, if you make the Eruv Tavshilin, so then there's no problem. Then you can keep your barbecue going to cook for Shabbat. Okay. This is the Eruv now. You prepare a food, you prepare a cooked item of food from Erev Yom Tov. Again, the Erev has to be prepared before Yom Tov. If you don't do it until Yom Tov itself, you haven't done anything. Beit Shammai omrim shnei tavshilin, Beit Hillel omrim tavshil echad. Right? Beit Shammai said you need 2 cooked foods. Beit Hillel say 1 cooked food is sufficient. Everybody agrees. Shavin, bedag, ubeitzah she'alav she'en shnei tavshilin, that the fish and the egg that's coated on top of it, the egg and the fish are considered 2 foods. Achlo or she'abad lo yivashal lav batchila. If on Yom Tov now you have already eaten the Eruv, or you have, or it's gotten lost, so now you can't cook anymore. But if you leave some of it over, you ate most of it, but you leave a little bit, you leave a kazait, whatever it is, so then you can still rely on that in order to cook for Shabbat. Okay, so says the Gemara, and we started to see this yesterday. We said, where does this come from? What is the source of this idea? Source of this idea of Eruv Tavshilin, essentially. And as we explained yesterday, and Rashi spells it out, we don't mean to say what is the source midoraita, because this is a din d'Rabbanan, but we mean what is the asmachta, right? What is the pasuk where they got where this is alluded to, maybe. So okay, you remember, right? Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, and so we're saying that you have to remember Shabbat from another day which comes to forget it. On Yom Tov you may forget about Shabbat. Look at Rashi. Rashi says, yeah, Zachor en Zechira ela b'davar mishtacheach. Whenever we're told to remember, the implication is it's something that you would have forgotten, right? Zochre ma'acher sheba lashkicho. He says, Ksheba Yom Tov be'erev Shabbat. I'm reading now in Rashi. When Yom Tov comes on Erev Shabbat, Karov Shabbat l'shtacheach mechamat Yom Tov. We're concerned, you're going to essentially forget about Shabbat. You're going to forget about Shabbat because of Yom Tov, particularly if you've had 2 days of Yom Tov, right, and the 3rd day of Shabbat. You're going to forget about that. Why? Shemarbeh b'sudat hayom you are having great lavish meals for Yom Tov. You're not going to leave over for Shabbat according to its honor. As we said, you've got 2 days Rosh Hashanah. You've eaten so much food on Shabbat, you're just going to have a bread and jam sandwich. That's incorrect. You can't forget about Shabbat. It's very important. And therefore, V'zircha katuv, you are warned, lezochro, remember Shabbat, k'shemale ve'luvei tavshilin, nimtza shezoch lo. When you prepare the eruv tavshilin, essentially you are remembering it. She'eino se'ela mechamat Shabbat, because you're only preparing the eruv tavshilin because of Shabbat, and that's going to help you. It's going to help you remember that as well. So that was essentially the source, maybe the origin of the takana. But says the Gemara, my tama, meaning what is the reason? What is the reason why we have to have an eruv tavshilin? Says Rashi, my tama, lama tiknu eruv. Why did they establish it? Pravadai lav eruv mishtay. The pasuk, as we said, is an asmachta, but the pasuk is not really the source for the eruv. V'lav eruv mishtama minei v'asmachta ba'alma. Okay, so it says you have to remember. How do you remember? You remember with an eruv tavshilin. Where does an eruv tavshilin come from? Why did Chazal establish it in this way? That's not really what the pasuk is talking about. The pasuk is talking about kiddush. To remind you of that. Right? The Gemara Pesachim, we learned this in Sobam Rabbanan, says Zachoret Yom HaShabbat means Zochreu al Yayin. You have to do kiddush when it comes in. And therefore Rabbanan, they're the ones who established the eruv. And why did they see to make this takana? Okay, certain level of repetition, yeah, not so clear exactly what's the difference between the Gemara's first question, the Gemara's second question, but in any event, so says the Gemara now, we have two opinions about why precisely it was the eruv tavshilin. Maybe the first question is saying, where we have an idea of this concept from, and the second one is specifically you say the eruv that has to be a tafshil. Why in that way? Okay, so Amar Rava. Rava says like this: Kadei shevol mana yafa leShabbat umana yafa leYom Tov. Rava says in order that you should choose for yourself a nice portion for Shabbat and a nice portion for Yom Tov. Okay, we'll see in a minute exactly what the other opinion is and what the difference is between them. Rav Ashi Amar, Kadei she'amru ein ofin miyom tov leShabbat, kal v'chomer miyom tov l'chol. Rav Ashi says, in order that people shouldn't think that you can bake. Right? Baking and cooking are interchangeable in this context. People shouldn't think that you shouldn't bake from Yom Tov to Shabbat, i.e., without the eruv. Kal v'chomer miyom tov l'chol. So all the more so that from Yom Tov to Chol. In other words, Rava seems to put the portion, the focus on Shabbat. Right? Rava says, Kadei shevol mana yafa leShabbat umana yafa leYom Tov. When we prepare the eruv tavshilin beforehand, we set aside special food for Shabbat. We shouldn't forget about Shabbat. We should make sure that we have proper food for the Shabbat meal. Rav Ashi on the other hand seems to focus more on Yom Tov. He's saying we have to make a mechanism so that on Yom Tov, we don't think that ordinarily you can just prepare for Yom Tov for another day. We shouldn't come to think it's the Kavod Yom Tov that you won't think that you can prepare for Yom Tov to Chol in the same way for Yom Tov to Shabbat. So that seems to be the nafkamina between Rava and Rav Ashi, that Rava is really focusing more on the idea of Shabbat, and Rav Ashi is more focusing on the Kavod of Yom Tov. That's what it seems to be. Let's see Rashi. Rashi says, Amar Rava kadei she'yevrov v'chule. Mitoch sheme'alev zocher et HaShabbat. When you prepare the eruv, right, which you have to do before Yom Tov. So we're forcing you before Yom Tov to think about the fact that you've got Shabbat coming. And even on Yom Tov, you got to think about the fact that Shabbat, because you can't consume the eruv on Shabbat on Yom Tov until you finish preparing for Shabbos. And you'll prepare, you'll make sure that you have food for Yom Tov and you have food for Shabbos. Rav Ashi Amar lo lechvod Shabbat tiknuhu ela lechvod Yom Tov. Rav Ashi says, no, this is not about the kvod of Shabbat, this is dafka about the kvod of Yom Tov. Opposite explanation. It says Rashi, Kadei she'omru ein ofin miyom tov leShabbat ela im ken itchem miboyam. People will say, you can't bake from Yom Tov to Shabbat. You can't cook. You can't carry on doing your barbecue from Yom Tov till for Shabbat, unless Hitchil Mibod Yom, unless before Yom Tov you started preparing for Shabbat. You're essentially just completing when you set aside this portion. When you set aside this food on Yom Tov, what you're doing is you're beginning the Shabbat preparation, and therefore on Shabbat you can continue the Shabbat preparation. But you can't start. You can't start from scratch, and therefore, so the more so that from Yom Tov to Chol, so then it's going to be legamrei lo. That is going to be completely prohibited. Okay, says the Gemara. So we're now in the third of the wide lines. Tanan, we have a Mishnah that teaches like this: Oseh tavshil me'erev Yom Tov. This is our Mishnah. Oseh tavshil me'erev Yom Tov v'somech alav l'Shabbat. Right? What did the Mishnah say? It said Oseh tavshil me'erev Yom Tov v'somech alav l'Shabbat. You prepare this cooked food from Erev Yom Tov, and you rely on it. You rely on it for Shabbat. So says the Gemara, Bishla Malav Ashi Da'amar Kadei Shomru Enofin Yom Tov Shabbat Hainu D'Me'arev Erev Yom Tov in but Yom Tov Lo. The whole point was, our Mishnah said, you want to perform the Eruv Tavshilin, you have to do it from Erev Yom Tov. So according to Rav Ashi, who says that all of this is about Kvod Yom Tov, and Rav Ashi said you can't prepare from Yom Tov to Shabbat. So that makes sense. You can't. We don't want people to think that on Yom Tov you can start preparing. You have to start preparing before Yom Tov. So therefore, Hainu Erev Yom Tov in, but Yom Tov lo. That's why you have to make the Erev Tavshilin on Erev Yom Tov, but you can't start making it on Yom Tov. So according to Rav Ashi's reasoning, I understand that makes sense. Ela leRava Mahiria me'erev Yom Tov afilu b'Yom Tov nami. However, according to Rava, right, what did Rava say is the reason behind the Erev Tavshilin? He said, Kadesh Yivrom Manei Afel Shabbat, Manei Afel Yom Tov. Just so it's about Kvod Shabbat. It's about that you can't forget Shabbat. So when do you have to remember Shabbat? You have to remember Shabbat on Erev Shabbat, which is Yom Tov. So according to Rava, why do I have to make the Erev Tavshilin before Yom Tov? All the Rava is saying is that on Yom Tov, you may have to make sure that you remember that you prepare for Shabbat adequately. So you should be able to do that on Yom Tov itself. That's the Gemara's question, right? El Rava Ma'ira me'erev Yom Tov filo b'Yom Tov nami. So says the Gemara in Achinami. That's correct. It could have said that is the case for Rava. Ela gzera shema yifsha. However, it's a gzera. We're worried the person's going to forget. Person's going to forget, and therefore you won't do it on Yom Tov, and you can't do it on Shabbat. So better that you should do it beforehand. Let's just see Rashi. Bishlam Rav Ashi, De'amar lechvod Yom Tov tiknuhu, kedei shomru asur latchil b'shulei Shabbat. The Yom Tov, hainu demel of Yom Tov, zach lasoto. Right? Rav Ashi who said, De'amar lechvod Yom Tov tiknuhu. This is all for the honor of Yom Tov. Kedei shomru asur latchil b'shulei Shabbat b'Yom Tov. Sorry, kedei shomru asur latchil b'shulei Shabbat. In order that you should know that you can't begin cooking for Shabbat on Yom Tov. I know the Erev Yom Tov. That is why in Erev Yom Tov you have to start. But according to Rava who says, no, it's not about Kvod Yom Tov. Remember, it's about Kvod Shabbat. So afilu b'Yom Tov. Yaseu lifnei Seudat Yom Tov. He says, so long as, Rashi has an important word. He says, so long as you do it before your Seudah on Yom Tov, that's the point. Now, we're worried that the Seudat Yom Tov, after that, you're not going to have any room left. You're not going to think about the Seudat Shabbat. So as long as before you start your Seudah on Yom Tov, but that can be in the morning or it can be in the afternoon when you come home from shul before you start eating lunch. Yesh kan Schirat Shabbat, Divrei Manotav. You're remembering Shabbat to set that food aside. So the answer was, we said, Shema Yivsha, Yishkach v'lo Ya'alev, Mishum lo Talid. Erev Yom Tov, you may have noticed it's a very busy time. The Gemara even says that Eliyahu won't come, Mashiach won't come on Erev Yom Tov because Bnei Israel are too busy cooking, right? They're too busy getting everything ready, running around and doing all the things. If you've ever been stressed, you've ever been in a high pressure situation, Erev Yom Tov, getting ready in the kitchen or elsewhere, it's not just you. That's the Gemara says, that's everybody. So therefore, we're worried with everything that's going on, and you might forget. You have to make sure that you do the Erev Tavshilin as well, otherwise you'll forget and you won't have enough food, etc. Okay, so now says the Gemara, V'tana ma'itila mehacha. So now we have another source for where another asmachta, I suppose, in this Braita for where we see the idea that's alluded to of Eruv Tavshilin. From this pasuk, this is a pasuk relating to the man. Et asher tofu efu, vet asher tevashlu bashelu. Right, the pasuk regarding the man says that which is baked should be baked, and that which is cooked should be cooked. But what does that mean? So Rashi says, yeah, et asher tofu efu, havale lemechtav hayom afu bashlu. It should have just said today bake and cook. El remezu. But what does it mean? That which should be baked will be baked, and that which should be cooked will be cooked. So he says, remezu, that is a hint. That there is going to be a day on which you aren't cooking for immediately for the next day, Yom Shishi, where you aren't cooking on Shabbat, and that's going to be our case. So it says the Gemara, Mikan amar Rabbi Elazar. In other words, says Rabbi Elazar that you can't bake unless you already have that which is baked. And you can't cook unless you have that which is already cooked. You've started cooking, and then you can continue cooking. You have that cooked food. Right? Says Rashi, b'chamishi b'Shabbat. It's been cooked the day earlier, erev Yom Tov. So mikan samchu chachamim le'eruvei tavshilim min haTorah. This is where what Chachamim relied on is the hint, is the allusion, the asmachta for the idea of Eruv Tavshilin. There is a discussion, by the way, we'll see it later on. Notice here, I keep saying that Afiyah and Bishul are interchangeable. Certainly in the case of Melachot Shabbat, that's true. But there is a question in terms of Eruv Tavshilin, do I need a separate baked food and a cooked, do I need a cooked food in the Eruv in order to cook, and a baked food in the Erev in order to bake, or is one sufficient for both? That's a discussion in Halacha. And Lamaise, what generally the minhag is that we take both. Right? We take a challah, we take a roll, or if it's on Pesach, we take a matzah, and we take a cooked food, an egg, or a piece of schnitzel, or fish, or whatever it is. And that way, you have in the Erev both cooked and baked goods. Well, strictly speaking, may not be necessary. Okay. Tanu Rabbanan. We now have a Braita. Braita teaches as follows: Maseh Rabbi Eliezer. This is the way it was once upon a time. Yom Tov, they would sit in the Beit Midrash the whole day. So a bit like we do on Shavuot night, but that's what they would do all day. So Rabbi Eliezer, he would sit the entire day, and he would teach about Hilchot Yom Tov. Now, at some point in the drasha, some of the Talmidim have had enough, and they start to leave. So Yatzta Kadri Shona. So the first group goes out. So Rabbi Eliezer says, Amar halalu ba'alei pitasin. These are ba'alei pitasin. What does that mean? So Rashi says, right? First of all, he says, He would sit and give the drasha the whole day. Yatzakat Rishona, so Rashi lists Od Seudat Yom Tov, V'nichu Dolesh. They walked out, they let him, he carried on giving the shiur, and they just, they walked out. Right? Every Rav has experienced this. There's a little bit of comfort here. That if it happened to Rabbi Eliezer, it can happen to anyone. So they went out to eat. So he called them, Halalu Ba'alei Pitasin, says Rashi, Chaviyot Gdolot. Pitasim means big barrels. That they'd big barrels of wine. חביות גדולות הכינו להם, בנו מלינו מסך משתאות, לפיכך מעלו לצאת. כלומר, בעלי נפש הן, ואינן יגיען לשמוע תורה. They're on the way out. They're going out to eat, to drink. That's what concerns them. They don't want to sit and listen to Divrei Torah. Okay, so that's Balei Pitasin. That's the largest barrels. Okay, at that point, it carries on a little bit. Yatzta Kachniya. The second group goes out. Amar lanu Balei Chaviyot. So those are barrels of wine. They're a little bit smaller than the first one. Kachlishit, the third group goes out. Amar halalu balei kadin are jugs. Katraviit, the fourth group goes out. Amar halalu balei liginin. These are even we're getting progressively smaller amounts. He's speaking metaphorically, saying how important it is for them to go and drink and right. But the fact is, they at this point they rather go and have their meal than listen to the shir. Kat chamishit. The fifth group goes out. Amar alanu balei kosot. Right, that's cups. Hitchilu kat shishit latzet. The sixth group starts to go out. Amar halalu balei mal. And these go out, and he says these are as a language of mar is a language of a curse. Rashi says, "Shaya Beit Midrash mitroken meod." The Beit Midrash was getting very, very empty. These people are leaving. There's no one left. So he says, "V'gnai adavar v'kashe beinav." This is very, very difficult for him. So he wasn't pleased about this. So he placed his eyes on the Talmidim. I looked at them. התחילו פניהם משתנים. So they started to, their faces start to change. They start to rather getting embarrassed. What can they do? Says Rashi, "Kisfulin shekoes al kat shishit mimnei she'achlu latzet v'kol sheken aleinu." So again, this is after six groups have gone out. It's the few students that are left, and they're thinking, what's their fault, right? Rabbi Eliezer is looking at them, and they think that he's angry at them for going out. So he says, "Amar lehem banai lo lachem ani omer." I'm not worried about you. Ela, it's not against you that I'm saying it. Ela la'alo sheyatz'u, but it's about those who've left already. It's like everybody knows, every student knows that it's always the kids who come on. It's always the student who comes on time that gets shouted at. Gets asked, why does everybody else come late? Right? You come to a class and there's a few people there, and lots of people late. The teacher says, "Where is everybody? Why is it late?" What do you want? Those are the kids that have come. Those are the students that have come on time, right? But the ones that are late, you can't say anything because they aren't there. So you had to. So he says, "Oh, it's not you that I'm angry at, but it's at all those who've left." Why? Shemanichim chai olam v'oskin b'chei sha'a. That they are leaving aside, right, the world to come. They're leaving aside eternity of Torah, and they're dealing with chei sha'a, which is temporary, which is in this world, food and drink. Right, the more important things, Torah. B'shat tiratan amar, and so then when they left, when they were finished, and they left, he said to them, "Lechu ichlu mashmanim ushtu mamtakim v'shachu manot le'nachon lo ki kadosh hayom la'adonenu v'arte'atzvu ki chadvat Hashem hi ma'uzchem." So, right, that is the pasuk, the famous pasuk from Nehemiah that we quote very often in Rosh Hashanah, where he tells them that go and eat good food and drink and send gifts to one another and enjoy, and in the fact that this is the day of Chedvat Hashem ima'uschem. Says Rashi, Simcha she'atem osim b'shvil HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The simcha that you are having of Simchat Yom Tov, that is for the sake of Hashem. Ima'uschem itazor etchem l'shalem hakavotechem u'levatechem shtilvu b'shvila. So now, but now the Gemara has a question on the story. It says, V'simchat Yom Tov mitzvah. Right. Rabbi Eliezer is getting so upset because everybody's leaving the Beit Midrash, and they're going home to eat the Yom Tov meal. Says that's Simchat Yom Tov. That is a chovah. That's a mitzvah. What's the problem? You're telling me shemanichim. Sorry, I skipped a line, but it says Amama shemanichim chai olam v'oskin b'chai sha'ah. You're telling me you're leaving aside that which is eternal, that which is part of the Torah, that which is Chai Olam, and you're dealing with Chai Sha'ah, which is temporary, which is transient, which is, you're just going to fill up your bellies. So no, don't we say that, no, we say, Simchat Yom Tov mitzvah. So the answer is, says the Gemara, Rabbi Eliezer l'tameh. Rabbi Eliezer goes according to his shita, which is, De'amar, Simchat Yom Tov l'shut. According to Rabbi Eliezer, there is no mitzvah, there is no chovah, certainly of Simchat Yom Tov. That is Rashut, because Rabbi Eliezer holds the Tanya. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, En la'adam b'Yom Tov, ela ochel v'shoteh, o yoshev v'shoneh. Now, we discussed this recently. Rabbi Eliezer says that when we spoke about this on Shavuot night, right? When it comes to a chag, a person can choose. Or ochel v'shoteh, you can sit and you can eat and drink. You can be engaged in Simchat Yom Tov, which is your own personal pleasure. Or yoshev v'shoneh, you can sit and learn all day. Clearly, he's giving the drasha all day. He says you should sit and learn. Rabbi Yeshua. So this is what's called or kulo lachem or kulo Hashem. Rabbi Elazar says you can choose. You don't have to do both. But what's better to choose? Better to choose kulo Hashem. That's why he's getting very upset. A very high and very exacting standard. So Rabbi Elazar, okay, maybe presumably would say you don't have to fast. You can have a little bit to eat, but don't go and waste all your time with big lavish meals. Sit and learn. Rabbi Yeshua, man, Rabbi Yeshua says differently. He says no. Chalkeu. Split it up. Chetzio Hashem, v'chetzio lachem. You can have half for you and half for Hashem. I.e., split up the day, and you have to be engaged in Simchat Yom Tov for yourself, at least for part of it, and that is the mitzvah. That is Machloket Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yeshua. We mentioned that when it comes to Shavuot, so everybody agrees that Ba'ina Nami Lachem. Even Rabbi Elazar agrees that on Shavuot you have to spend time. It's ironic because Shavuot we spend the whole night learning, but you spend time during the day or before, whatever it is. Spend time having your meals. And we explained that was in order to show that on Shavuot, the day in which we receive the Torah, we want to show that we're happy with it, and it's not a burden, and that it means something very important to us. So where does the machloket come from? Right, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Shnei Mikra Echad Darshu. They both learned it, even though Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua have very different opinions when it comes to halakha. They both learned it from the same pasuk. They both learned from the same pasuk. Also, Katuv Echad Omer Atzeret Lashem Elokecha, v'Katuv Echad Omer Atzeret Tieh Lachem. Right, one pasuk says it's for Hashem, one pasuk says that it's for you. So how can that be? That's a contradiction in terms. So Rabbi Elazar savar o kulo Hashem o kulo lachem. Rabbi Elazar says it doesn't. Right, you can choose which one. Either it's Lashem or it's Lachem, but it's one or the other. But why is it written both ways? Because you can choose. You can decide which one to fulfill. Rabbi Yeshua savar chalkeu v'chetzio Lashem v'chetzio Lachem. Right, so Rabbi Yeshua says no. You split it up. You have to have both. You have to have some of it is for Lachem and some of it is for Lashem. Okay, and that is the machloket, as I mentioned. It's a famous machloket between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua. It appears also in the Gemara Pesachim, also over here, other places as well. But that is the bottom line. They both learn from that pasuk, from those two pasukim, and the contradiction in terms. Either you choose one or the other, or you split it up in order that you have both. Okay, so as I mentioned yesterday, we'll talk about now the cases. What happens if a person did not prepare an Eruv Tavshilin? Is there still a way that they can? That they can cook and prepare from Yom Tov to Shabbat? We'll see that in the next year. We'll see one of the ways here, and as we move way through the parak, we'll give us others. But we'll stop there for today. Just a reminder that there will be no shiurim next week. Next week I'm going to be away, so Wednesday, Thursday next week no shiur, and the following week we will resume B'ezrat Hashem.
Okay, happy July